Good evening, everyone. Tonight is a meeting of the South Kingstown Planning Board. It is a work session. The date is Tuesday, June 13, 2023. The time is 7 p.m. The first item on our agenda is roll call. Joe Murphy.
Here.
Susan Axelrod. Here. Liz Carp. Peter DiStefano. Robin Pothier. Paul Jordan is absent, and Maria Mack is here. Our next agenda item is a discussion of proposed new land use legislation for the state. Brian, you have the floor. Is your mic on?
Just not in front of me. So, yeah, one is just a table of all the different pieces of legislation that the all of the House bills in that table are linked in blue, so you can go and read them. There are still changes that are coming as the Senate bills are being dealt with and aligned with the House bills. Do expect, as of today, Senate Judiciary Committee was scheduled to act on the inclusionary zoning statute that's been come out of the House, some of the Zoning Enabling Act legislation relating to transit-oriented design, amendments to the Low and Moderate Income Housing Act, and the legislation creating a new land use calendar in the Superior Court. That change goes along with another proposal to eliminate the state housing appeal. So that from the town decisions to Superior Court.
And what was the last one you mentioned about the State Housing Appeals Board?
There is a proposal right now that appears to have a lot of momentum to eliminate the State Housing Appeals Board as it's currently created in the Low and Moderate Income Housing Act. There are a lot of changes proposed in various pieces to do with appeals and review. So in some instances, decisions will no longer go to the Zoning Board of Review, and they'll go directly to Superior Court. And in other instances, they will no longer go to SHAB, and they will go directly to Superior Court. I think this is all part of an effort to speed up the process, but also at the expense of, you're eliminating steps in the process, but you're jumping to processes, to court processes that are typically more prolonged than Zoning Board of Review or SHAB processes. I think that's accurate. My experience with SHAB is fairly limited.
Brian, will there be a greater financial cost for the community if the zoning board appeal process is bypassed and gone directly to the next level?
I think there will be, largely because those Zoning Board of Review matters are less formal. Some of these intermediate review steps are also good for getting rid of some appeals that might not ordinarily go all the way to Superior Court. Sometimes you have an obstinate property owner who feels they were mistreated at the planning board stage and demands the appeal. At least with the zoning board of review, it's a fairly simple process and allows the attorney to give them the appeal, even if it might not have the strongest merits, yet you don't have the full expense and time associated with a full Superior Court appeal. So, last week, the Rhode Island Planners Association went together and went through, let's see, so this again is a review. There are proposed amendments to inclusionary zoning. Some of the basic changes in there is that the floor for inclusionary zoning goes from 20 to 25%, so it matches comprehensive permits, which is gonna make it more difficult to make that a more attractive option than comprehensive permits. So I think you'll see more people jumping towards the state level.
But they get bonus if they do inclusionary, right? 2 per affordable unit? I think that's what I read, was that for each affordable unit, they'll get 2 bonus market rates if they do inclusionary.
30% instead of 20%.
Right, but they've changed the density alignments with the comprehensive permit too. So it's kind of a moving target right now until we see where everything comes in. And it may depend on the particular size of the development too, which is more optimal for the development.
But as a tool, we would like to be able to have communities keep an effective inclusionary zoning ordinance in place, rather than either do away with it or make it, as you said, less attractive.
Yeah, and we had this discussion at the planners meeting, that it's going to chase some towns away from inclusionary zoning. Towns that haven't adopted it are gonna be less likely to adopt it, and some that have it, they decide it's no longer worth trying to keep.
Was this changed, did they change the minimum number of lots in order to have this ordinance? Was this the one that went from whatever it was to 11? Obviously, we have 5, which is a very good lower threshold, so that it kicks in.
10,
10.
higher than 10, so 11 is the trigger.
So we don't, as a community, have the authority to continue with 5? Or is that an option? Okay. All right. I mean, 5 has made a lot of sense because it triggers that inclusionary zoning. You know, at least you get something, even if it was 20%.
And then, how many are triggered with comp permits? Yes.
Why would you bother?
Yeah, so the language that was changed was it used to be not less than 10%, and now it's saying not less than 25%.
But then they also added a greater amount of the density bonus for market rate, correct? So then when you do the math, you're not really gaining that much in terms of the affordable units, which is what we're trying to gain.
How many additional, what's the density bonus on the market rate?
2 market rate for each affordable. there's any out for, lands developed beyond carrying capacity or anything like that.
A lot of areas it works, but other areas it's already determined that it's carrying capacity. It would be good to not have,
Is your mic on?
It doesn't require a town to have inclusionary zoning. So if it gets too onerous and you have issues like that you point out, it might drive towns to repeal their inclusionary zoning ordinance.
This in general, we have some areas in town that we're really concerned about the carrying capacity. And we identify those. Would we be able to put within our regulations that density bonuses do not apply in this area because of whatever environmental impacts that we've created?
I don't think that would allow it under the revised bill.
What was the question again, Joe?
So could you do a zone-by-zone inclusionary zoning requirement?
Not the way I read the,
I wouldn't.
I think you're either all in or all out.
And does this also matter for where sewer system is? Or does this go anywhere even if there's not sewer system or water?
Again, there's no restriction based on zoning. Certainly, the legislature has been fairly consistent with these bills that anything that requires DEM approval for septic systems has to get DEM approval for septic systems, so they're not getting out of those requirements, and eventually, that's gonna catch up to them in terms of, how many septic systems you can put in and where, and if you're not on public water, what's your proximity to wells?
No, I guess that kind of to consider it along with this is that, that there's going to be an amendment to the comprehensive permit statute. And one of the amendments, they actually, which is a good thing because they didn't have it before, is a table of density compared to how many affordable units you're providing. So to trigger it, to be able to file an application, you need to have 25% affordable units. And that, now it's going to tie it to a specific density bonus of 5 units per acre. And so if you do 50%, it goes up to 9 units per acre, 100%, it will go up to 12, and that's in areas without sewer and water. It's a little bit denser in areas that have sewer and water.
Does it look like that's gonna go through?
It very well may, and what that would do is, applications that come in and ask for 17 units per acre, 20 units per acre, or now, under the comp permit statute, it doesn't give you any guidance, so you kind of have to guess. You could say, okay, you're giving us 25% units, 25% affordable. This is your do you have water? Do you have sewer? This is your density bonus you're allowed. So while it makes the inclusionary zoning a bit more cumbersome and make less sense, it does kind of give some more framework to the comp permit statute.
Some of their densities, though, without public sewer.
It's really dense. It's gonna be dense.
It seems to me nearly impossible when they're talking about 8 units per, I think it was 8 units per acre without sewer.
So if you offer 50% affordable, it's 9 units per acre, and that's I'm sorry, not connected to sewer. It's 8 units per acre. If you don't have water or sewer, if you're 100% affordable, so that would really only be a nonprofit housing authority that would make a proposal like that.
And doesn't the dwelling units per acre differ from what we have in the past utilized as far as assessing density?
Well, this really hasn't existed before. before, I mean, we've given density bonuses on a unit-per-unit basis, even under the comprehensive plan. And we've looked at density when we're weighing the merits of the comprehensive permit application, but we really haven't had a specific connection between density and number of units until this legislation. Uh, 6059 sub A is basically an effort to roll back merger by ordinance. So if you had undersized lots owned under the same name at a particular point in time, most towns have an ordinance that requires them to automatically merge in order to try and create conforming lots. Under this legislation, so long as the lots that were merged are as large as 50% of the lots within 200 feet, they will be able to be unmerged and become buildable lots again on their own. Not necessarily horrible, because we do wind up with some unusually large lots, at least compared to their neighbors in some of the denser areas. When the original building standards were on, 5,000 square foot lots of land, before zoning, and now maybe you're R10 or R20, and it was a very common practice for developers to divide their subdivisions up into teeny tiny lots and then allow people to customize their lot by buying multiple pieces and putting them together for their property. But if you bought a lot of them and then the zoning caught up to you, now all of a sudden you can't re-subdivide that, even though everybody around you may be on lots that are a fraction of the size of the property.
Isn't there also something in this bill related to dimensional requirements as far as modifications? And I think there was a change in time frame from, 30 to 14 days. I don't know if that was in the final version, which creates a little more of a little more difficulty for any neighboring property owner to respond.
In terms of what, Maria? I'm not recalling that.
It was under special provisions. It changed the use of modifications from dimensional requirements from a may to shall, and then they added the addition of a floor to the dimensional requirement shall not exceed 25%, but not less than 15%. And then they shortened the time from within 30 days to 14 days for any type of response.
Yeah, so I,
30 before.
yeah, and that used to be optional where property owners could apply for small amounts of dimensional relief without going to the zoning board. They'd send out a notice to abutting property owners, and if no one objected, the building official could just grant it. So now, municipalities, it's not optional, they have to do it. And the time frame for abutting property owners to object is shorter, and the amount of relief you can get without going to the zoning board is greater.
So Brian, does that, vision for the merging of lots, does that look like that's going to occur?
My understanding is this is on track to go through. Yeah, let me just,
Unfortunately, one of the things that has happened this session is that there were over 2,000 bills in the General Assembly. So that means unless a legislator has some kind of staff, just to keep up with that number of bills is almost impossible. And the ones that I have spoken with don't even understand the meaning of some of the bills that they have voted to approve. They've just told, oh, these are housing bills. You know, the speaker wants them approved.
So this is slated to go to the Municipal Government Committee tomorrow night. And in the grand scheme of things, I don't think a lot of effort was put into opposing this particular bill because some of the other bills were required so much attention.
Which one are you talking about? The one we were just talking about before?
The
Or this-
Subdivision and Land Development Act bill, which we haven't gotten to yet.
So can I ask a question about the one we just talked about? If the entire neighborhood is half acre and I have a quarter acre lot, so it's 50% the size of all the neighbors, is that now developable? Is that what I understood when I read through the thing you guys sent out? Is that what I understood, was that as long as it's within 50% of the neighboring lots, it's buildable, even if it's zoned the size of the neighboring lots?
This says that, the qualifier says, unless 50% of the lots within 200 feet are of the same or larger size. So essentially, it's saying, you can't merge, you can't have an ordinance that requires mergers of non-conforming lots if there are other non-conforming lots surrounding it. So that 50% of those lots
Okay. I think I misread it. I thought it said 50% of the size of the surrounding lots. When I read the PowerPoint, I thought I misunderstood that it,
If 50% of the surrounding lots are the same size
okay.
as the unmerged lots or smaller.
That makes more sense to me. I misread it, sorry.
Let's see.
6081.
Yep. So 6081 is one of the bigger bills. There's, and it's going to be very difficult to get through a discussion of this in one night, so I really suggest that you guys take a look at this on your own. It creates some substantial changes. I believe it reduces it from 25% to 20%. Sorry, I'm just refreshing my memory on a lot of this. No, it does, that's a different clause.
And that's the difficulty, is that some of these bills may be impacted by other bills, and there's not necessarily sort of a big picture view that was developed as these were written. And by the way, these bills were written without input from the planning community, those folks that interpret and administer the land use laws.
So the major section of this, section 4553-4, is, as we discussed before, it goes more from requiring numbers as to requiring, basing the decisions based off of densities. And you can see, if you read that, you can see how it's structured as we just discussed. You get one density, you get different densities based on the types of affordable housing that's being proposed, depending on whether it's sewered or not sewered.
And I'm not sure if this ended up in the sub-A or not, but they prohibited municipalities from limiting the number of bedrooms to less than 3 per dwelling unit, which doesn't make any sense because it doesn't create flexibility. What if you're doing a mill reuse and you want to have studio apartments with 1 bedroom? I mean, it just, there's so much in here that doesn't make sense. It doesn't help the housing diversity stock.
I mean, it also includes changes to parking. It prohibits municipalities from limiting floor area requirements. Puts restrictions on using development moratoriums to block affordable housing development.
So the changes to parking, is that irregardless of whether or not there's alternative on-street parking? Like, I understand in some of the cities where there's on-street parking, how does that affect a development here that wouldn't have that option? Is it then available only?
It doesn't make
cars?
any connection to the availability of off-site parking. It says you cannot require more than 1 for any dwelling unit with 2 bedrooms or less.
And this applies to urban, suburban, and rural communities regardless of whether they have a mass transit system in place or, you know, what the walkability might be like with, I think, no regard to traffic congestion, especially when you think of this in a cumulative way, you know, if you have multiple versions of this. I don't recall if the sub-A put pre-application back in. I know that there was a change to say that pre-application was not allowed unless there were 11 units or more. Go figure that one. We all know how valuable pre-application is before an applicant has spent a lot of time and money on engineering and so on. It's that informal conversation that gives them, hopefully, guidance as the project moves forward, which ultimately results in a better project. So I don't know if that
So
changed.
it did retain the municipality's ability to require a pre-application.
And it wasn't limited to number of units.
It's not keyed to number of units.
And is that the same as TRC,
No.
which also is a good way to vet things before it is? Does that change TRC?
No, it
No,
doesn't change.
thankfully, no. CRC is probably going to be more important than ever now.
TRC is a different animal because it's not, it's really an internal analysis by the town. I know we make the meetings public and whatnot, but it's the town's own internal analytical process of bringing all those different departments together to comment on an application.
I believe that initially there was a change to a definition of infeasible, financially or logistically impractical for any applicant, which is quite subjective. Not that we don't hear that anyway.
Well, and also that was the argument that we made to Shab on the Fieldstone Farms, because right now the definition of feasible only speaks to nonprofit developers. So we said, they're for-profit, was approved with conditions, they have no right to appeal. Shab didn't agree with that argument, although I think it follows from the statute, but at least someone must have thought it was a good enough argument to eliminate it, so. Now it would be clear that any, whether it's for-profit or nonprofit, they'd be able to appeal.
It basically puts the whole financial argument at the whim of the developer. There will no longer be a way for the town to effectively say, it is financially possible for you to do this affordable housing project, you are still able to build it and turn a reasonable profit because all the developer has to say, now, it's financially impracticable for me, so I'm not going to do it.
And a public hearing must be held within 30 days of certificate of completeness. Whereas before, it was 45?
45.
And then the elimination of master plan, what impact do you think that will have, seeing as that eliminates a stage of review where you have vesting, if you have the approval, and you have a plan that's general in nature, not requiring any kind of permits from state agencies, not requiring landscaping. So in a way, an applicant can sort of dip their toe a little in the water because then they're vested for that particular project and density, barring any issues that might come up at preliminary. So if we remove the master plan and go straight to preliminary, what do you think will be the impact to the review process and to the outcome?
I don't know that it's, well, I certainly think it has negative ramifications for the developer because they're not going to get that early vesting with a minimal amount of investment in design. However, when you sit and watch you as the board react to these plans, you guys are looking for so much information at the master plan level before you allow anything to vest, that it almost makes more sense to go straight to preliminary, so you have all of that information. They're getting rid of master, but there's no change in the amount of information you're gonna get at preliminary. So you're gonna get everything that you've been asking for at master plan. You'll have all the traffic studies, you'll have all of the landscaping and everything right then and there for you to evaluate the plan as well.
So if you don't have master plan and the board or the TRC decides that we need to have a traffic study that may not have been initially provided, or a peer review, yes, thank you, then how and when would you ask for that to happen if you haven't seen it?
Well, I
Unless
mean,
you say it pre-application before you know.
It's not necessarily the elimination of master plan. It's the elimination of master plan in combination with the lost review time by taking that stage out. So you aren't going to have as much time to react, to ask for peer reviews or whatnot. That may actually be something that needs to get bumped down to the pre-application meeting. You may want to identify for these developers early on, you need to consider these other elements that, we think we may need to see peer review.
You may get a lot of information that in many applications you don't need that way. But at least when you do need it, you'll have it, and you'll get a certificate of completion.
It's an interesting, because otherwise we have, we're going to be getting a lot of information in a shorter period of time, because we only have that one stage of review, because the final stage of review is administrative in nature and doesn't involve the board or the public.
Brian, if you have to have the public hearing within 30 days of it being determined complete, and there is a posting requirement of 48 hours or something for the meeting, doesn't that leave a period of time that one meeting a month would not address it? So if they, if they submitted it, let's say 3 days before our public hearing, you wouldn't have time to necessarily post it, so we couldn't hear it that meeting, and then the next meeting was too late. So those towns that require, or that are only meeting once, we have, 2 meetings per month, and we can hold it on a work session. But there's a lot of towns that just meet once per month. That's gonna just force a lot of special meetings, yes?
Yeah, I mean, if the number of instances of them shortening time periods without recognizing that they're dealing with volunteer boards that only meet on a monthly basis typically is mind-boggling. It shows zero appreciation for what you can realistically expect from a body of people who have daytime jobs and other responsibilities to deal with all of this work and really important work, often in abbreviated timeframes.
Can we just pause for a minute? Can you just check the audio? Jamie just sent me a message that the audio, the microphones weren't working.
And can I ask, Andy, your mic's always over here and you're talking, that's why I can't hear a word you say.
Sorry about that.
Thank you. Sorry, Peter. Thank you.
Yes. Okay.
Nothing's picking
The mics weren't working.
up. Wow.
I don't know. Okay. Let's carry on and make sure that folks speak up. Other implications of this, and also the, was this the, wait till he comes back.
He's gonna-
That's okay, sure.
So does this mean we can only have one public hearing? We can't continue a public hearing because we've got a window? And can we ask for extensions to keep things going, or are we locked into some kind of time frame?
You can still ask for extensions. The problem is, if you get an applicant that knows the timeline works in their favor, and giving you additional time for review doesn't, they might just say, you have 30 days, and give me a decision, or else I'll get an approval.
And I think once folks have absorbed this, both in this community and others, we should connect with our legislators because they were the ones who voted to approve this. Certainly, all the House has approved these.
I wouldn't be surprised if the next few legislative sessions, they're going to have to go back to the drawing board a couple times, similar to the accessory dwelling unit law they passed last year. They
Yes.
passed it. I don't think most people understood it. They started to try to implement it. They realized there were a lot of issues with the mechanics of it. So now they're overhauling it again this year. I think I'd have to think that this is going to happen with a lot of this stuff.
And it's unfortunate because communities like South Kingstown have a very creative ADU set of regs in place.
We moved on?
Yes. Well, unless there's other questions about, and this also, is this the, did the language for adjustments remain in the, in this bill? A category of relief called adjustments.
Yeah, they included a definition for adjustments. I,
I'm not sure why that wouldn't be under waiver, but it looks like, it sounded as though it was an
It just
additional.
sounds like they're changing the terminology, because it really is what we would recognize as as waivers or variances. It could be that they're creating one term to cover both of those things when you're in a unified review setting.
Okay.
So moving on from LMI, the ADU Act. This is interesting. This is the only bill that is scheduled to go into effect immediately. So this will be effective July 1st and will automatically override every ADU ordinance in the state. We have a fairly liberal ADU rule already. They're pretty much allowed just about anywhere without limitation, so long as you can meet your accessory setbacks. There are some limitations out in the R200 to deal with protecting groundwater resources. But the big changes here are that the sizes of the ADUs increase pretty dramatically. We currently limit ADUs to 750 square feet and one bedroom. Under this legislation, if your principal dwelling unit is less than 1,500 square feet, you are allowed an ADU up to 60% of the floor space of the principal. It can be 1 or 2 bedrooms. In fact, there's a section of the act that prohibits towns from saying that you can't. ADUs will now be 1 or 2 bedrooms. Between over 1,500 square feet, between 1,500 and 2,000 square feet, your one-bedroom unit maxes out at 900 square feet, so 150 more than we currently allow. And your two-bedroom ADU maxes out at 60% of the square footage of the dwelling unit. And over 2,000 square feet, your one-bedroom ADU is still only 900 square feet, but your two-bedroom ADU goes to 1,200 square feet. So on a quarter-acre lot, half-acre lot with a 2,000 square foot house, you effectively get to build a second 1,200 square foot as an ADU.
And can you explain how that might work if an applicant came in with a subdivision plan with X number of units, and that was approved, and what then could be the process should they elect to add an ADU onto each and every one of those lots?
The ADUs aren't counted towards density.
Right.
So it's effectively taking an R20 and turning it into an R10.
There's no requirement for them to show the ADUs when they initially get their approval, right?
They're allowed by rights. But there's also language in here saying that if somebody wants to come in and propose the ADUs as part of the original development plan, we can't count them towards density units. They're still only accessory structures, so you still have a principal dwelling unit and an accessory building with a dwelling in it.
Is there a lot coverage thing?
It does not address lot coverage.
So it's like taking the zoning ordinance and doing away with it in many cases.
Well, it's going to allow some pretty significant additions if you have the property and the the existing square footage in your principal residence. Nothing, there's also nothing that prevents you from coming in on one permit and expanding your principal residence to get to the square footage you need, and then coming back to the ADU.
And I mean, ADUs are a good tool, but we have some checks and balances in place,
So if my,
which,
so if my ADU was on top of my separate new garage, how does that work? Is the garage space counting toward that? So so the dwelling unit can be the same size on top of a garage, or a side, beside a garage?
So 1,200 square feet
A 1,200 square foot garage with a 1,200 square foot apartment on top is still a 1,200 square foot.
three-car garage, so a three-car garage with some additional storage area in it, with an equal-sized dwelling unit.
So that is true, and Jamie, correct me if I'm misstating this, but I think lot coverage requirements would still be the same. It would just allow you to build that extra unit, at which point they could ask for a variance for lot coverage, but it would still apply the same total lot coverage set in the
Right,
zoning
you
ordinance.
still have to meet the lot
And the dimensions,
requirements for the underlying accessory structure. So if you're putting your dwelling unit over the top of your garage, you're not affecting your lot coverage.
I thought, I was talking about building a new garage.
So if you were,
and what about setbacks?
I'm just thinking about this person has a merged lot on the side of them, and the lot gets unmerged, and the guy puts two accessory dwelling units. He goes from a single-family house on the side of him to a fourplex.
So I understand accessory dwelling units because that encourages smaller housing and all that sort of stuff. Is there any place to regulate them becoming Airbnbs all over town?
Yeah, there actually is a provision in here that prohibits them from entering the short-term market rent.
Enforcement of that, however,
Oh, but I like that. But then if you find them, what do we do?
So I'm a little unclear. We do currently have a requirement that the owner has to live in one unit or the other at least half of the year. There are some prohibitions in here about limiting ADUs to family members or certain age classes or things like that. But I think, Peter, that we would still be able to keep that requirement in place, that the property be owner occupied, one or the other?
This bill has been considered probably one of the most problematic ones by the planning community that have come out this session.
I think the importance of the owner occupancy provision, of course, goes along with the enforcement idea. Because the more owners you have present on their properties, the fewer enforcement issues there will be for the town. In terms of rentals enforcement, the town manager has spoken about creating a rental registry like some towns have.
Yep.
We do have a municipal court coming online at the beginning of the next fiscal year. So, hopefully some of those heavy lift enforcement items will be a much lighter lift in the future.
All right, let's move on.
Freeze this. What are we up to?
6085?
6085. So, 6085 requires that all zoning ordinances be brought into compliance with new comprehensive plans within 18 months. And it also creates new responsibilities in terms of reporting by planning boards and planning departments to show that we are engaged in actions to implement our comprehensive plans, which is going to be an additional level of work for everybody concerned. So if you're familiar with the comprehensive plan, you'll know that there are implementation objectives associated with each element of the comprehensive plan. The state is going to be looking for reports on, I believe, an annual basis as to our status of achieving the goals that we've set for ourselves under the comprehensive.
And I believe the last that I heard, there were 13 communities that did not have up-to-date comprehensive plans. 2 of them were in process. And it has historically been that statewide planning, the state agency tasked with community assistance and reviewing the comprehensive plans, they have unfortunately been underfunded for many years and are now at an historic low number of employees.
And while it's not a problem for us having a relatively new comprehensive plan under our belts, towns that do not have a compliant comprehensive plan will be denied the ability to rely on their comprehensive plans as a basis for denying permits, which didn't used to be the case. It used to be only that if your comprehensive plan was expired, it couldn't be used against the state. Now it can't be used against anybody.
And then, Brian, what about the logistics of updating the zoning ordinance and the future land use map with regard to timing from when a comprehensive plan is approved or updated or rewritten?
That's the 18 months, isn't it? Or was the future land use plan down to a year?
Might have been modified to a year, but doing either a zoning rewrite, I mean, some of you will remember the length of time that it can take to do a comp plan update or a rewrite. Doing the same to your zoning ordinance is equally time-consuming and can be equally expensive. I mean, we haven't, well, the last time we did Phase 2 zoning, it was a 2-year process with a consultant. So I-
And it should be noted that as of the current moment, all of this is, the state's asking for all of this to be done without any financial support to towns to get it done.
Unfunded mandate. And at one time, we did have what we called an annual action agenda that then became a biennial action agenda because we couldn't accomplish some of the tasks in a one-year time period. And we would develop that and try to go through as much of it as possible. Sometimes we would get sidetracked by other issues that came up, but we did have that kind of a process at one point in time. Anything else on this?
No.
Okay.
So, did we already? Okay, we
We had a-
didn't get into 6061. Did we
No.
skip over that? So,
Yes.
6061, House Bill 6061 is an extremely substantial rewrite of the Subdivision Act. So, direct application to your work here. Some of the highlights of that are changes to minor and major plans. A minor land development is now well-defined, which it wasn't before, but the extent of minor land developments have gone way up, as well as minor subdivisions are proposed to go up to 9 lots.
I thought it was 11. But I could be incorrect. So every community in the past had their own version of what constitutes a minor subdivision, correct? And now it's being mandated for
Right.
every community as to what defines a minor subdivision.
I don't understand, if it's 9, what does that mean for review if there's 8?
No review by the planning board.
For lots under 9?
For minor subdivisions overall. That was my understanding.
Do we not review them?
With minor subdivisions without street creation was all administrative.
And so minor's just changed its definition now. So we would not see a subdivision of 8 units going in. Would we see it if there were a bunch of waivers or anything like that?
Yeah, if,
Street creation includes both public and private streets, I assume?
yes.
And then the thresholds for, well, the process has also been modified to use development plan review. Which warrants an attempt at an explanation. My understanding, at least of the initial bill, was that it's administrative development plan review for projects under a certain threshold. I believe it was Buildings under 50,000 square feet. So that means 49.9 and under.
That's a big building.
No review by the planning board.
But yes, review by the staff. It would be reviewed by the staff, but not,
Administrative officer, yep.
What type of property? Commercial
I believe it included commercial,
and multi-unit or no?
probably. Multifamily units of less than 50,000 square feet. No public hearing is required unless street creation. 200,000 square feet of floor area for mixed use. 100,000 square feet of floor area or less would create a review, yeah. So the trigger for the review by the planning board is bumping up to 100,000 square feet of floor area. Is that right?
This is when no street creation is required. So somebody,
Well, this would be the.
so if somebody bought the Wakefield Mall and decided to tear down the Shaws and build something, it would never come before us?
Those numbers came down, Maria.
But,
I don't have the final numbers.
Who thought this was a good idea?
Probably the development.
these are not combined with the comprehensive permit process, right?
No,
No,
this is just,
So if I wanted to tear down a mall and build some kind of thing, do I get, and I don't get to review it, do I get to impose architectural standards on a commercial building?
Absolutely not.
So,
No review means no review.
or no standards? Oh my gosh, who thought that was a good idea?
you would need to have the standards baked into your land development requirements. They would still have to comply with them if they existed. It would just be reviewed by staff. Compliance.
So we could put into our regulations that it needs to have landscaping, and it needs to be pretty, and it needs to have adequate parking, and it needs to have stormwater, but we just wouldn't see it, but they would still need those requirements.
well, you couldn't put it needs to be pretty, they'd have to be objective.
Well, I meant something a little more scientific than
Right,
that.
right. Well, I know, I understand, but a lot of times when it comes before the board, you can consider aesthetic considerations that are harder to,
What was the time frame for this, Brian? I know the initial one was 25 days to make a decision. I don't know if that was changed.
So in our town, though, we have a limit on how big a structure can be? Like how big a commercial space can be, correct?
Well, we have development plan review, so, I mean, if you look in the zoning tables, and you look under, let's say, multifamily or some other stuff, depending on the size, there's a development plan review, so it's a, multi-unit, 12-unit, it's a development plan review. Sounds like it eliminates that.
But like, there's a reason we don't have a target here in town, because you can't have a commercial space over 10,000 square feet, right? I think that's what I understand,
I don't, this won't change the zoning ordinance, it will just change the
the review.
review process.
Okay.
Yeah, so minor preliminary plan is still 65 days to decision.
But it sounds like this is gonna eliminate a lot of our development plan reviews.
Yeah.
Possibly, right?
It's going to eliminate a lot of your smaller applications are gonna wind up going through administratively. You're not gonna see the smaller subdivisions that are 100% compliant with the rules, which is not a bad thing. There's no reason to have you guys spinning your wheels on a development that checks all the boxes, and there really isn't any room in there for embellishment from the planning board.
But I think what it does, where it does fail, is sometimes we have a development plan review, and it's by right, and we're really looking at how do we, listening to the neighbors, seeing what the impacts are, figure out how to mitigate those impacts. So it seems like that part of the process is gonna be missing.
Yeah, and one of the points we tried to make, at least a lot of my comments were that a lot of this legislation is going to wind up reducing the public transparency on these applications, which is going to wind up creating friction with community members. Sometimes you need to at least have a place for people and comment.
If it doesn't check all the boxes and it needs waivers, does that kick it back into review? Like, I understand if it fits, setbacks and height or whatever, but if it does want waivers for height or setbacks or whatever,
It's a major.
does that then become part of us?
My understanding is that in order to get it expedited or to avoid review, they need to meet the requirements set forth therein.
No waivers.
And the issue of transparency and the public input is a very important one. Often, local knowledge is something that's invaluable, and people that have lived in an area for many years understand that there's maybe a certain issue with drainage or, something to that effect. And it's useful when they come to the meetings and we have a conversation and make the project a better project because you allow for those issues particular to a site.
So if the public can't comment with us because we don't see it, is there a way for the public to have any input? Can they talk to staff? Is there any avenue for the public to comment on something going in next door?
So the way I would look at the changes to the review structure is that really it would become a technical decision, in that staff would look at it. If they fall into the categories that are specified there, they comply with the zoning ordinance and they comply with the subdivision regulations. There's no provision that would allow staff to have discretion or to have this. Let's take, if you were to take input from abutters and they say, hey, we prefer this, staff wouldn't have any authority to account for those concerns as long as they check all the boxes.
So it becomes check off the boxes kind of planning rather than discretion or intangibles.
Right. And it's planning statewide as opposed to people that have no.
Local governance.
So,
Yep, and that has been, I would say, the primary concern from the beginning is utilization of a one-size-fits-all, kind of legislative effort. And, we have varied communities within the state, urban, suburban, and rural. We have non-renewable natural resources that are essential for public health and well-being. We have, natural heritage areas. We have groundwater protection overlay districts and recharge areas that are important. And it's unfortunate that these, it's basically a state override.
yeah, I mean, I guess it is a big, I think there's still a question, although from everything I hear, it's going to pass, but that doesn't mean it necessarily will. I mean, it will pass proposed. I think probably it's going to pass the House because the Speaker's behind it. Whether it gets through the Senate, that's a bigger question. And even if it does pass, they're going to be retooling this for a while, because as people start to realize what this statute does and how much it changes what they're used to, legislators are going to start hearing from their constituents, and they're going to have to go back to the drawing board on some of this stuff, I'd imagine. Some of it might work well. The Comp Permit Act in particular, I think the idea that you tie the amount of LMI units to a specified density, that's a good idea. Whether they have the densities right,
Right, right. But
we'll find
certainly
out.
the increase in the LMI units is very important, because with the 75-25% ratio, how would we ever get to 10%?
So have any of these passed House and Senate? Have some of them passed House? Have some of them, are some of them stalling? Like, where do they all stand?
I believe that most of them have gone through the House
They
at
have.
this point.
Okay, so now this is the version.
I'm not aware that anything has gone through, gotten final approval by the Senate and is ready to be advanced to the governor's office for signature.
And the other thing worth noting in terms of the process, you have a bill, and the bill is heard by the appropriate subcommittee, usually in the House it's municipal government, sometimes it's judiciary. People have the ability to write letters, come and testify. But once a sub-A is developed, you no longer have the ability to comment on the sub-A, which seems to be kind of anti-democratic process, if you think about it.
Sorry, so these have gone through the House, and this is the version that the Senate's getting, but the Senate may make modifications to it.
Right, so
They pass it.
they could, you know, a lot of times they get to the end of the session and they suspend the rules and, you know, they'll have
Everything
late-night sessions where they're passing bills back and forth between the House with changes and, you know, a totally new product will pop out at the end of, you know, a late-night, early morning legislative session, so. I don't know if this will, I'm sure it will be a big topic of discussion. I don't know what's gonna happen with it, though.
Right, obviously, we're not the only community that will be impacted this way.
So all of these bills still appear to be alive in the Senate, and all are scheduled for committee hearings tomorrow, in tomorrow's session. 4 of them on the Judiciary Committee, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of them on the Housing and Municipal Government Committee.
And then how much longer are they in session before they recess for the summer?
I think Friday is scheduled to be the last day.
So if they don't vote this through by Friday, it'll sit until,
It's dead.
It won't pass.
it'll have to start from scratch.
Technically, they have to start.
Not
I mean,
necessarily.
technically, they have this all written out, but it has to start over as a new bill.
There's one tomorrow set aside for Senate hearings. We don't know anything beyond that, but.
And these, you know, all of these are up for sub-A, which means they'll be basically for discussion by the committee members. They're not taking any more public comment
Right,
on these at this point.
that's,
The Planners Association has submitted letters on various bills to the committees. Whether or not they'll have any impact, we don't know. Once you get beyond the subdivision act, I mean, most of the other stuff is pretty self-explanatory. You know, there's,
TOD, transit-oriented development, it's fine. There are other changes that are reasonable.
and the transit-oriented design is a pilot program, so it's not a permanent change. Let's see.
Brian, if I wanted to go look at these online, is there a link that you could provide?
Yeah,
Yeah, those are live links.
Okay.
so the table has all the links in them,
This was in the email with the agenda. With the agenda, this came with the agenda.
yeah.
So what is the adaptive reuse one for commercial buildings?
So that was actually fairly palatable. It makes it easier to reuse commercial and institutional buildings for housing. It's supposed to expedite any empty buildings and allow them to be easily reused.
Now, there was a bill earlier this year that we heard about that was a mandate that school buildings would be developed as affordable housing, and the state was taking over those towns.
This is not the same thing.
Okay. Whatever, is that other one out there?
That was the last legislative session. That
Okay.
was last
Away.
year. That did not resurface.
We got very excited about that when it came out. That's gone?
So there was a bill passed that, it created like a study committee that required, reports from municipalities about abandoned properties. There was a list. But at the end of the day, it didn't mandate, it only applied to property owned by the municipality, and it didn't say that the municipality had to sign off on development or had to give it to a developer. It required them to submit these lists to this commission that was going to be created, that would study the issue. So I think it was intended to encourage conversion, but didn't mandate it.
It was never as exciting as it sounded.
No.
Okay.
Could it be? the
Well, I
next
should say
step?
alarming.
You know, maybe after they do the study, then the mandate will come, but.
Similar to the, an earlier bill that eliminated single-family zoning.
That's all I have on the bills. We'll know more next week as to what finally got through and what didn't, and we will keep everybody apprised. Regardless of what happens, it does appear like it's going to be a busy next 12 months on regulatory housekeeping, because at least some of this is going through, and some of it's going to require changes to zoning ordinance and land development regulations.
And I hope that in the however many million the governor's budget had for affordable housing, and I think it's at least 19 FTEs that are going into the Department of Housing, that communities are going to need some help in rewriting their ordinances. It's going to take time and money. So, what was that? Oh, full-time employees. So they're adding on to this new department.
Well, it's a brand-new department. They were going to have to.
Right. And just as an FYI, there is a shortage of planners in the state. URI has not had their community planning and development program, although they have a certificate program for many years, and there is a impetus to have URI go back to that and reinstitute that as a program, which is greatly needed. So if you know anyone at the university, please make them aware of the need. All right, update on RFPs. Old Town Hill Road?
So I chatted with Jamie after last night's council meeting. The Route 1 Stewardship Plan RFP was approved by the council last night. The RFP is with Data Engineering, and I believe he said that they'd begin work on that right away, and there was a time frame associated with it. RFP for architectural work for the EMS building at the end of Ministerial Road was also council approved with Union Studios. It's going to be broken into two components. They will do a preliminary design and elevation component, and then once that's reviewed and any changes are made, they will work on final design elevations for that. I'm sorry, but mentioned timeframe, but
And the Old Tower Hill Road RFQ has gone out.
the Old Tower Hill Road RFQ went out last week. And Jamie has mentioned that he's reached out to a number of different firms to make sure that they're aware that it's out there. There was also a very interesting and active discussion at last night's work session between the Town Council and the Economic Development Committee about advancing work on Old Tower Hill Road and mixed-use zoning and whatnot. So the Town Council is anxious for this to move forward. The Economic Development Committee is anxious for this to move forward. Having put a considerable amount of effort into the subject over the last 5 or 6 years, it has lingered without a lot of direction from a lot of people during that period of time. So it's good to see it moving forward. It's certainly an area of town that's in need of work. And the sooner we can get something in place, the sooner we can get some good changes going in there. But without the appropriate planning, there's a lot of danger for what you might get there if you don't have proper rules in place.
Liaison activities. Go ahead.
The affordable housing collaborative had a special meeting just the other night. They had an additional meeting just the other night. They're going to do some public outreach at one of the river fires. I think, is it July 24th, July 27th?
It sounds like it might get bumped to the August 3rd river fire because they couldn't get the tent location that they were looking for on the 27th.
So they were gonna have a little tent and I guess a kiosk and hand out some information about affordable housing and probably some stuff on ADUs and other things that, relate to affordable housing.
I think one thing we're going to do is with some of these legislative changes coming on, we'll try and highlight a little bit about that as well as other things.
And they were gonna do that, is Megan with the Johnny Cake Center or is the,
I believe so, yes.
she was gonna do some stuff on, I think, the Johnny Cake Center as well there.
She was going to try and get Johnny Cake to co-man the tent with them.
That's all I have.
I jumped over the continuing ed because it was my understanding we weren't having an educational session this evening, correct?
That's my understanding.
Update from planning department staff, general update, and membership in Rhode Island APA and CNU, capital improvement program. What have you got for us?
So, it's Jamie's intent that come the beginning of the fiscal year to get all of the board members, with the Rhode Island EPA, so you guys being publications and everything, being able to attend their training. He was looking to also extend to the chair a membership in National American Planning Association, and he's investigating the possibility of CNU membership as well. I think from talking to him, the idea is to have that available when CNU comes to Providence, which I don't think is
25?
it's not next year, so
No.
it's 2025. So that you guys could participate in that. I've done it since Jamie got staff interested in it. And it's very interesting to see some of the ideas that they're talking about. Some of them are clearly not appropriate for South Kingstown, but some of the ideas are pretty wild to see what people are doing. Very creative.
Great. Any other updates on legal issues? What more can there be at this point, right? Very good. Any questions from anybody? Thoughts? Motion to adjourn? Motion from Peter, second from Liz. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Thank you, everyone.
No.
I haven't seen anyone post that.
Look what time it is. It's the middle of the afternoon.